Trump's secret police are kidnapping people, but what happens when they keep him in power? Check it out, leave your comments, ding the bell, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. By John Lewis, the vote is the most powerful nonviolent tool we have. Our John Lewis quote from the first hour is perhaps even more brilliant. He said, "Never give up, never give in, never become hostile. Hate is too big a burden to bear." John Lewis. So I asked the question, what if Trump was to turn what's going on here in Portland? What if this was a small test of a much larger program? Trump needs to get the country under control if he's going to win the election. And I don't mean he needs to get the American people behind him because he got the country under control. I mean, he needs to be able to control the election process. And the parts of the country that will deliver a Joe Biden victory are not the rural red parts of America. They are the blue cities and suburbs, and many of them are in red states. So if Donald Trump does not want the good citizens of Atlanta to have an easy time voting in November, just shut the city down. Declare it a crisis. Now, in order to declare the crisis, first you have to provoke the crisis. Right? I mean, Atlanta has a crisis right now of COVID infections. And he might be able to use that as the excuse. In fact, he certainly could. But he would have a harder time getting people out on the streets, police out on the streets doing that. But, you know, if he was to say, okay, Keisha Lance Bottoms, mayor of Atlanta, sorry, you're out. Or if he had Brian Kemp do it. And Brian Kemp says, yeah, we're going to put an emergency manager into Atlanta. Now, what provokes that? Well, first, Trump's secret police show up in Atlanta, and they start cracking heads in some little demonstration that's going on. Keep in mind, what's going on here in Portland was limited to a 3-block area. There were 3 city blocks where all this was going on. Pretty much, mostly, about a block and a half. These are very small. These were leftover demonstrations from the George Floyd protests. And, the principal evil that was going on, or, whatever Trump calls it, law breaking, was tagging things, was graffiti. But as soon as Trump brought out the federal police, as soon as he brought out the secret police and started cracking heads and throwing tear gas and shooting people and got it in the press, right? Shot a guy in the face. A peaceful protester. He's just standing there holding a loudspeaker over his head. Shot him in the face, fractured his skull, broke the bones of his face, emergency surgery. It made the news all across the state. Everybody in Portland was like, what the hell? And so the next night, instead of 30 or 50 people showing up, there's, 300. And as I pointed out, last night there were 300 moms out there. And they tear gassed and beat them. So all this provides the excuse. Now, the governor of Oregon is almost certainly not going to declare a state of emergency and evict our mayor here, Ted Wheeler, from the Oregon mayoralty, or however you say that. She's not going to kick him out of the mayor's office, and she's not going to replace the city council like Rick Snyder did in Michigan with the mayor of Detroit and the city council of Detroit, or the mayor of Flint, Michigan and the city council of Flint, Michigan. And it turns out he was doing that in Michigan so that one of his buddies could make some money off the situation in Flint with the water supply. Well, that's not going to happen here in Oregon. We've got a Democratic governor. But how many states have blue cities like Miami and Republican governors like Rick DeSantis? I mean, I don't have a list here in front of me. I'd have to kind of go through in my head state by state. Texas You've got Greg Abbott as the governor. You've got Houston, Dallas, Austin, San Antonio, all of them. I believe they all have Democratic mayors. I might be wrong on one of them, but and they're all, largely Democratic cities. So Trump sends in his provocateurs, his federalized secret police. They rough some people up and do some high-profile, tear gassing in the streets, and all of a sudden, the counter-protesters show up. People get pissed off when, foreign invaders come into their town. We didn't like it in 1776. We don't like it today. People get pissed off. They show up in the streets. And so the governor of Texas or the governor of Florida or the governor of Georgia says, okay, that's it. These cities being run by these Democratic mayors, they're out of control. We're going to declare a state of emergency and replace the mayors with emergency managers. Now, this went through a whole litigation process all the way up to the Supreme Court when Rick Snyder was doing this in Michigan. And I believe, although I'm not an expert on this, and it's been, 4 or 5 years or maybe more since I've done the research on this. And you can bet after I get off the air today, I'm going to be digging into this. But I don't see what would stop them. So let's say, for example, we'll just pick a state and a city. Let's say that Brian Kemp says, that Trump sends some federal officers into Atlanta. They start tear gassing some people. All of a sudden, Atlanta is having protests, quote, riots. So Brian Kemp kicks out Mayor Bottoms and the city council, replaces them with an emergency manager, as Rick Snyder did in Michigan, and that emergency manager locks down the city. In November, you can't go out. We're under a state of siege or emergency. At the same time, the guy running the post office, Donald Trump's hand-picked toady who's running the post office, who last week issued a memo to postal workers saying basically time to slow down the mail. No more overtime. He screws up the mail to the point that the mail-in ballots that happen in November are, coming in way, way late. Too late to be counted. And so Georgia in November says, we can't certify our electoral college vote because we can't certify this vote. I'm sorry. And the same thing happens in Texas and Florida. Well, now you don't have, regardless of how big a blowout Joe Biden has, he doesn't have 50% plus one of the electoral college vote. Because you got a bunch of states that are just refusing to certify the vote. And so what happens? Well, it's time for the 12th Amendment. The U.S. House of Representatives decides who's going to be the president, and each state has one vote. And that vote is decided by the state legislature in each one of those states. And you say, oh, that's crazy. That would never happen in America. It did happen in America. It happened in 1876. Sam Tilden got more votes in the popular vote. He was the Democrat. He got more votes in the popular vote nationwide, and he won the Electoral College nationwide. He never became president. Rutherford Hayes, the Republican, became president because the vote went to the House. In short form. I mean, it's actually much more complicated than that because, they went through a couple of iterations of this, and there was a huge battle around it, and Congress ended up later in 1876 or 1877 actually passing an amendment to the 12th Amendment, a law that amended the 12th, that clarified, shall we say, the 12th Amendment. And sure enough, here we have Reuters. President Trump on Monday said he plans to send law enforcement personnel to major U.S. cities.